All right, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. We've been watching a whole range of different films from a lot of interesting filmmakers so far in this season of understanding film, but I really wanted to kind of drill down into for the next few films from other cultures, other backgrounds than some of the American filmmakers we've been seeing, like Wes Anderson and Catherine Bigelow. And so this month we're going to be talking about Whale Rider, directed by Niki Caro. Whale Rider is a Australian New Zealand film, and as opposed to a lot of films that came out of that region, especially the Australian New Wave in the 1980s, which featured things like Mel Gibson's Mad Max, for instance, that comes out of the Australian New Wave, which also would have featured a lot of white characters and filmmakers. What we have is Niki Caro, who is a white woman director, but really focusing in on Indigenous individuals to Australia. Another film that comes to mind in this vein would be Philip Noyce's film, Rabbit Proof Fence, which is really, really good. It takes place in a different time period. It takes place in the sort of the burgeoning era of Australia's kind of colonial period and the resistance of Indigenous people against the colonial government. Whale Rider is set in the present day and really focuses in on some of the local, tribal, and Indigenous culture. And Niki Caro does a beautiful job, as we'll talk about here, thinking through the different ways that culture can be experienced, not just presented in a film, but experienced by people. In this film, much like the fluidity of the water that surrounds the characters and imbues them with power and connects them to nature, culture is not going to be a static thing that sort of just exists in a museum or in a book. It is something that is profoundly linked to the lived experience of the characters. So I'm going to walk through a couple of motifs I was picking up, as well as think through some of the elements of the film that I think are important. The film begins with a passing. It's a grim opening for sure, but it is telling, right? We get the sense that this Indigenous community is losing population. In the opening chapters of the film, it feels as though their culture is slipping away. And so the idea that the film opens with Cliff Curtis is the man here. He's sort of the princeling of this tribe. And the hope of this sequence was that his wife would give birth to a son. The wife passes in childbirth, and he doesn't get a son, he gets a daughter. To Cliff Curtis's character, that's incidental. The gender of the child, he's lost his wife. It's a very difficult experience, but we see that Cliff Curtis's father, sort of this paterfamilias, is rejecting, even from birth, his granddaughter because she's a girl, because she's not a boy that he feels, to sort of power the tribe and power the Indigenous culture into the next decades. And so we have this initial conflict set up of not simply sort of a Indigenous culture feeling as though it's on it's already on the margins and it's on the verge of erasure, but also sort of within the community, sexism and kind of the barriers that are holding back potentially, and in this case, definitely some of the tribal elements pushing into what would be the 21st century. This film comes out in 2002, filmed in the late 1990s. However, fairly quickly, we get a sense, we then do a time jump into the present day of the film, and we see Keisha Castle Hughes, who becomes one of the youngest people to be nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actress. She's now 12, 13 in the film, and she at first seems quite close with her grandfather. So that opening sequence that kind of showed issues with his sense of gender identity and the role of women within this community. At first, we seem to think that they're quite close. We get these interesting close shots of them on a bike, kind of experiencing the world together. But we'll see that even though he feels close to her and she feels close to him, some of these still retrograde feelings are going to persist. And that's one of the driving conflicts, that while they may be close, he still wants that man to run the tribe. He still wants that male figure to continue the culture, even though clearly that thinking has been one of the things that's been partly the undoing, as much as surrounding supremacist ideology of the surrounding community. Niki Caro does a really great job. She's done a lot of different films, but she does a fantastic job in this film of sort of capturing the grandeur of nature. A lot of the community is on the seashore, a lot of the houses, a lot of community centers. So we get these wide shots of the ocean, sometimes during the evening, sort of a sunrise, sunset kind of stuff here, which is very evocative, but also at night. And the ocean, in many ways, becomes a character as well. Where we talked about the moon being a character in Moonstruck, we get a little moon here. The ocean is absolutely not just a character, almost sort of a deistic kind of figure. Niki Caro also does a great job capturing some of the local texture. Here we have these cliffs, these sort of ridge cliffs, as well as sometimes underwater sequences. At one point, Keisha Castle Hughes's character dives underwater. We have this sort of dreamlike moment where she's hunting for something, but we kind of see the seaweed lapping back and forth. We also get a sense of sort of the fading culture. Sometimes it's something like this, where we have this boat that's sort of, it's supposed to be a ceremonial boat, but it's half done. It's half carved. It's just up on stilts. And we can see from the drapery, it's been there a while and it's kind of just fading into obscurity. So it is this symbolic boat that sort of evolves over the film. We also get these wider shots. And frankly, if you've seen Nomadland, which we were talking about previous to this presentation in our opening moments, Chloe Zhao's style is much like Niki Caro's, wide open shots that have pastel coloring, but also kind of juxtapose the enormity of nature to almost sort of fading cultures and remnants of cultures, indigenous cultures, like, well, frankly, Chloe Zhao's first film, Songs My Brother Taught Me, set in the United States. So just interesting comparisons I'm coming up with as I'm discussing this. What's interesting, right, is as much as we may see kind of the remnants, this rusting bus, these sort of rusting water containers, we also see persistence. Her grandfather here working hard to fix this motor that's clearly a little bit on the fritz, but making the most of what they have. So while he's fixing this motor, obviously motorboats and that kind of technology is crucial to their way of life. We also still see the fading remnants, even though the mountains are standing quite solid and powerful. Sort of the artifacts of their once slightly more robust culture kind of fading into obscurity. And so what is going to sort of bring them back is the question of the film. Can something bring them back? Or are the forces of modernity too much to face? And also, is it, again, some of the grandfather's beliefs that are really holding them back too? We get some interesting also extreme close-ups, like this early shot of the protagonist as a child that also is echoed later on in terms of a moment where we see her and her eye closed. Niki Caro kind of sometimes going very wide, as I was showing before that, to kind of show the enormity of the situation around them, the setting and nature, but also sometimes getting very, very close. Right? This is a very intimate film. It's a very soft and quiet film at times. And so we want to make sure that we have, Niki Caro seems to be implying the most proximity to our characters physically as well as emotionally. Sometimes also, like in this early moment where we see Cliff Curtis clutching his wife as she's passing, this warped, distorted image through glass. So again, kind of impressionistic moments at times to channel the emotion. And of course, there's whales. We'll see another whale later. What's interesting, though, is that, so again, there's a point, I don't have an image of this, where Cliff Curtis, the father, has left. So after this situation with the passing of his wife, and the fact that he clearly doesn't feel like he's welcome anymore because he didn't give birth to a boy, he leaves the community and he goes, I believe, to Germany, where he becomes an artist. And so at one point he comes home. Now Keisha Castle Hughes' character is 12, and we can see that they're close, but there's that estrangement because he doesn't live in the community anymore. Now he's an artist, and he creates ceramics, and he kind of tours them in art galleries. But we can tell he's not very happy with this life. And especially the grandfather, his father, is very upset, that he's left, but also almost implying to take the culture and sort of itemize it and materialize it and then have it over in Germany somewhere, as opposed to doing it here in the homeland, is separating, is forming a breach of the culture. What we see, though, through Keisha Castle Hughes' character is she has embraced the culture in terms of the song, the myth, the performance, memorizing the language, the indigenous language, as much as she also speaks English. So she's bilingual or trilingual in the film. And so we have a number of times, right, the clearest way this culture is articulated is through songs. We have this moment where they're about to sort of try to reignite an indigenous sort of summer camp. And we see her leading the group singing this song that is then echoed by her grandmother, who also is singing the same song. It's almost this duet to try to, right, the idea of the summer camp is to get these boys to learn the male role, so one of them can become the tribe's leader. But we can see she's physically in the front of the group, and she's also singing this song that connects the present to the past. And we have this throughout the film. The fact that she is consistently practicing. And here, it doesn't look like some of the other images, right, where there's sort of the crumbling buildings and old buses. Here she is standing proud, singing, practicing her music in the indigenous language, and almost the earth is enveloping her. We also see throughout the film, in addition to this, her performances, sometimes in groups. We can see the young boys doing an indigenous performance, and she's doing the same thing while singing. And halfway through the film, we also see this very evocative outfit and makeup and a necklace, and she's sort of part of this group. And here's a moment too where sometimes it's in celebration and sort of a representation of indigenous culture, sometimes very traditional, sometimes modern. We also have a moment here earlier in the film where we see one of the community members singing a funeral dirge, really in the indigenous language. So Niki Caro is thinking through all this music to sort of think about how culture is sometimes sung. It's not going to be something in a book or museum. It's something that is spoken. It's something that is sung orally. Caro also really spends a lot of time focusing on not only things like this very evocative carving that is in one of the great halls that they spend time in, as well as sprinkled throughout the community. We see this beautiful wood carving with also some inlaid bits, as well as this sort of fabric and texture. And we can see Cliff Curtis here now as an older man. His hair is different. He's got the necklace, but he's sort of pressed up against the wall. This is an image of the outside of the building, this beautiful ornate carving where they have their communal spaces. And this is also a statue sort of evocative of this concept of the whale rider, part of their mythos, part of their cultural mythology, and potentially more than mythology, as we'll see. The idea of the whale rider is sort of embodied in this physical sculpture. And so Niki Caro is also sometimes thinking about how culture is physical, is embodied in physical structures and artifacts that are, again, not sort of put somewhere else, somewhere where you have to, pay a ticket price. It's right within the community. It's these cultural spaces and things that we can hold and touch and be close to. To that end, here's an initial moment, almost German expressionistic. It's a very gloomy moment where we see Cliff Curtis's father and the grandfather here. They're sort of reckoning with 12 years of alienation, and he's touching. So instead of simply here, where he's sort of juxtaposed to or arranged with the ceramics or the woodwork, here he's caressing the wood. And it's almost this quiet moment where they're not really saying much. He's just kind of feeling the carving. And here also, like then the conversation, he's still holding on to the wood, almost like he needs an anchor for this tough conversation with his father. So what does he do? He holds on to the wood. He holds on to the carving. Later on in the film, we often see Keisha Castle Hughes's character touching or running her hands against things. Here she is at this point, because she's a young girl, she can't take part in the training for young boys. And so she's on the outside of the school, but she's running her hand against the wall, almost as if she's feeling this educational institution tactilely, as opposed to being part of the lesson, although she's trying to listen in. And also we have this moment where we see that one of their greetings is to sort of put their heads together. And we'll see there's an echo of that later. And of course, at this moment, one of the last times we see Cliff Curtis, about halfway through the film, he returns to Germany. He wants to bring her home to Germany. She can't leave, though. She's thinking, I can't leave my home here with the water, with nature. We see this hug that really embodies this idea that culture is something that is touched, something that is held. It's not, again, something ephemeral. It's very physical. It's very corporeal in this film. There's also the idea, though, that without it, as we see from Cliff Curtis's character, who is in this difficult situation where he feels ostracized because of the beliefs of his father and just sort of family history, but he's doing what he can. Whereas we see folks that are in the community when they feel separated, like this friend of Keisha Castle Hughes's character, who, because he isn't able to perform in the masculine ideal, he's ostracized from the group. Or we see later on when things are going not well in the training, in terms of trying to find that male leader, we see it's a crushing blow to the grandfather, and he sort of hides in bed, feeling separated, feeling like he's failed his community. Later on, we see something similar where the protagonist, is also bedridden, feeling separated from the grandfather. So we have this thinking that when we're separated from culture, it's not simply, well, I can move on to something else, or, well, it's incidental. There's some other, global culture. I can just turn on the TV and boot up American Netflix. I'll be fine. For these characters, it is a breach, and it is a physical loss as much as an intellectual or mental thing. And yet we also see culture finds a way. Again, as I mentioned, there's this period of time where Keisha Castle Hughes's character, even though she embodies by this moment all this cultural knowledge, is still closed out because she's a girl, but she still finds a way. We see her sort of lurking around the schoolhouse, looking through the window, and there she is peeking through the window as he's telling his lesson to all the boys. We see her go and find her uncle, right, the brother of her father, who at this time has kind of, it seems, lost his way, isn't really engaging with the community either, is drinking a lot, his friends are smoking a lot of marijuana, they're sort of in a haze of just disassociation with kind of the loss in their community as much as anything. But we see that she rekindles this passion he has for his community, particularly this way of using the staff, right? There's a particular dance as much as a military activity. And she not only finds him as a guide and a mentor, but also she rekindles his passion for culture. So sort of the instinct to come back and bring it back binds a lot of people together and rebinds them. And even this moment here where, so the boys get on the school bus and they drive the bus to, from the local community school, the public school, to this indigenous summer school. And we see her riding her bike like faster than the bus. I guess the bus is moving very slowly or something. It's in low gear. And she zooms past the bus on her bike to go see the uncle. And so this sort of embodiment, this physical embodiment of she's going to find culture, she's going to reconnect with it, rekindle it, no matter what. Again, a very physical activity as well, right? She's not in a car, she's not driving, she's physically biking, she's moving past them. And also this moment where the grandfather has tossed this white horn or this white object that he usually wears as a necklace into the water, and he tells the boys, go find it, go get it. None of them can. They all fail in this final test. So he becomes very, again, as we saw, disassociated. Like, what have I done? I've lost my icon. The boys can't do it. This is terrible. We see then Keisha Castle Hughes jumps into the water later on, and she not only pulls out the necklace, but also dinner with this lobster here. And we see this idea that culture perseveres. It will continue. It may not be in the way that some individuals in the culture want it to be or have felt it should be, but humanity, when it feels connected to the culture, will do amazing things, will persevere to make sure that culture continues. Throughout the film, this is perhaps the more obvious, but, the final point to consider here, throughout the film, we see lots of groupings. Here we have her grandmother with some friends. They're, whimsically smoking cigarettes when they're alone. And then as soon as they see the grandfather and Keisha Castle Hughes pull up, they stub out the cigarettes, they open the window, they're playing cards or something here. So sometimes we see small groupings, sometimes we see larger groupings here. So it's a performance of all the boys showing off their skills. Here they are also outside, sort of learning their staffs, and we can kind of see how Niki Caro staggered the people so that we sort of have a nice balance of people and nature. And there, of course, is the boat in the background, still not quite finished, though. But we also have this moment towards the end of real crisis where it's implied, potentially this is literal, potentially this is a coincidence, or maybe it's something more mystical, where Keisha Castle Hughes' character feels very at her lowest point, and she kind of calls out to spirits of her faith to the whales, I need help. And so what happens is, for whatever reason, a bunch of whales do breach upon the shore, and we see the grandfather goes down to one, and the community comes and sees there's a lot of whales that have sort of come ashore, and they're not going back into the water, including what they believe to be the largest whale, the one that would have been connected to their tribal elder of mythical times. And so this is a very difficult situation, and we see that the whole community comes and they're struggling to get the whale back into the water, to have sort of lost so much for years, to see their culture fading away, and then to think, or they feel fading away, and then to think, we're going to lose these beautiful creatures as well. And we see them all coming together. They see that they have a tractor, but nothing's working. And we have this sad, despondent moment where we see them all again in communal grief, moving away from the whales, turn their back on this, into the water. But then we see sort of an echo of the earlier moment where the grandfather and father are touching heads. She touches to the whale's head, and she communicates with it, just speaks to it, just whispers to it, and it does shift, it does move, and it goes into the water. And we have this brief moment, dangerous, because the whale is going out into the water, is moving very quickly. Niki Caro captures this beautifully. I assume this was a very carefully planned sequence, because we go underwater and we see that there's this potential that she could perish, getting the whales back into the ocean. And this idea that culture is sacrifice, not simply in terms of what this entire community comes together to try to do for the whales, but also what she does individually. Obviously, she does survive, though, and we have this beautiful moment at the end where the boat is finished, and we see, all of the elements so far developed in the film coming together. So the tactile quality, this beautiful little sculpture that's both sort of wooden, as well as fur, as well as some other materials. And we can almost see, it's up on a crane, but we don't see the crane. So it looks as though the boat itself is floating amongst the clouds. And we see here the original dress, right? We're kind of pushing the boat out to sea, and we see everyone kind of rowing together here. They have sort of a specific song that they're using to keep powering folks. And we can also see all the different types of individuals here that all lay claim in their communal setting. And again, so that physical representation. We also see, as they're pushing the boat out to shore, Cliff Curtis's character has returned. So he sort of returns to the fold. We don't have a moment where, he shows up and, oh, I'm back, right? He's just part of the community. I think that's really important, that we don't have kind of this moment where the erstwhile father is kind of rekindled and there's a big moment. He's just back. He's just folded into the community group, and he's there pushing with the boat like everybody else. We have, again, so the combination of song and dance, movement, women as much as also men doing their various performative acts. And we also see at the last moment, the grandmother, Cliff Curtis's German wife, who's pregnant with his child, their child, and also the uncle's girlfriend or fiance, right? They're all together kind of observing this boat. But then we see at the end, not only is it important because we see this kind of reconnection of grandfather, he's come to terms and he's embraced the fact that, yes, absolutely, my granddaughter is the true leader, and understandably so, of our tribe, of our culture. But this idea that culture is unity, right? This whole sequence is designed, it seems, to kind of show that not only is this a celebratory moment, not only is it some kind of communal act, but through these acts, we're able to achieve this unity. And we see all kinds of individuals that we haven't seen in the film. Clearly, they've all come from disparate corners of their experience to this moment. They're on the boat, they're heading into the water together. Next month, in terms of pushing into some interesting international realms, we're going to be thinking about Mother by Bong Joon-ho. So Whale Rider is very elegant, very sweet, and beautiful. Mother is intense. It's a little darker. Bong Joon-ho directed Parasite. You might have seen that last year. It was the first non-English speaking, non-US based, non-English, I should say, film to win Best Picture, foreign language film, I guess. although plenty of people speak Korean, so it's not a foreign language, it's a US language. But anyways, so he wins for Parasite, but Mother, I think, is really important to check out. Usually Bong Joon-ho is known for genre films like The Host, a monster movie, or Snowpiercer, a dystopia science fiction. I think if people like Parasite, Mother is really the film to see next. It's one of his urban dramas, psychological thrillers. Um, it has more of the DNA than I think some of his other films, also like Okja is sort of fantastical parable. Mother's a cool one, and it just turns out Tubi, one of those online free websites, has it, so anyone can go see it right now for free. Maybe there's some ads, so I think that's really great. And so we're going to be talking about that next month, and I'm really excited. I'm a huge Bong Joon-ho fan, and we're going to have fun talking about that. Although tonally very different, The Whale Rider for sure. It's intense. I think it's rated R, so just be prepared for that.
All right, thank you, Mike. We're looking forward to that for sure. And if anyone has any questions about accessing Mother on the site in question, you can get in touch with me or with Mike, and we can walk you through it. But at this point, if you'd like to turn your cameras back on and turn your speakers back on, you can share your thoughts or questions on Mike's presentation there, if there is any. It was a very, very good, another great presentation, Mike. Thank you very much.
Well, I appreciate that, Alex. But especially folks that have recently seen it, what are your thoughts on the film? You don't have to necessarily agree or disagree with anything I'm talking about here, but just what did you think of the movie?
I'll say that I liked it a lot. It wasn't sort of what I expected. I'm not sure what I did expect, but I enjoyed it very much. I'm lucky enough that I've been to several South Pacific locations because I dive. So I've been to Palau, and I've been to Tahiti, Moorea, Palau, Hawaii. And I have to say that watching the film, if you go to some of these islands and you see the culture, you get a chance to see the Polynesian culture, and you understand some of the, it's small islands, relatively small cultures, and yet, all the culture that's spread out throughout all these islands. So there had to have been interaction amongst the islands, travel over these wide seas. In those days must have been stunning. But there's something about this culture that is so much more human in some ways. I'm not sure if I can put it into words, but you see it in this film, that life is somewhat down to the basics. It's a relatively simple island. We don't see an awful lot of technology, even though, it could have been filmed yesterday, much less, 15, 20 years ago. And I think that that's one of the most important parts of the film. I think, especially Americans and maybe Europeans and so on, might look at Polynesian cultures, go to some of these small islands and think, well, they're below us. That, we are the great cultures because we have all the technology, we have all kinds of wonderful inventions and humongous buildings and so forth. But you go to that culture for a while and you recognize that it is in many ways far superior.
And great point, Diane. And I would just note as you're saying this, I'm thinking back to some of the images that we just looked at, where we see sort of rusted out hulks, but what are those things? Those are things, produced elsewhere. Whereas the common space, that town hall, so to speak, probably looks identical to how it once did, right? Those wood carvings, clear, dating back a long period of time, they look just as fresh and vibrant and beautiful as anything they've maintained, whereas the more modern, so to speak, more technologically quote unquote advanced stuff is falling apart. Whereas that woodworking endures, and obviously we can see the sustenance also the characters are drawing from it. Yeah, great point.
Well, I have some thoughts on the characters themselves. The grandfather when this young lady was born. She was one of twins,
Mhm.
and the boy dies. And I think that flavored the grandfather's thoughts on everything, because that wasn't supposed to happen. His grandson was to take over as leader of the group, to be the whale rider, the descendant of the whale rider that came from a far away on the whale, came to the island and then started this community. And so he had this granddaughter, and I really think from the very beginning he saw something in her, but she was a girl,
Mhm.
and that can't be. And so he had this hard time dealing with her. He had his community lessons for the boys to see who can be this leader, this new leader. And it doesn't work out. And so that's why he goes and he's sleeping and morose and everything. But she doesn't give up. She kept going because she's innately the leader. And he didn't want to see it. She saw it in herself, and her grandmother saw it. And so that's why when they were singing, she would be there leading the songs, and the dance, the Maori outfits was just stunning. She was very upset because her grandfather didn't accept it. And then all of a sudden we have the whales at the end, and she's talking to that whale, the leader, the whale. She gets on it. The grandfather is upset beyond measure because she's going off on this whale, but she doesn't die. She is the whale rider. And then all of a sudden he says, yes, I have to admit it, that maybe this is a male dominated society, but that young lady is innately the descendant of the whale rider. And so she goes on the boat with her grandfather as a potential down the road, the leader. And so that, along with all the culture and all the music and the land, I think the whole thing was just a stunning movie. I just was mesmerized by it. So the personalities mixed in with everything else. And then I didn't know that Curtis was actually New Zealand. A New Zealander, he's a Kiwi. I didn't know that. I
Mhm.
thought he was American. So anyway,
Hmm.
the father of the little girl.
Right, right. Thanks. Yeah, excellent. Gretchen, what are you thinking?
I also really enjoyed this film. It was very stunning, and visually, and the storytelling was very I really liked that kind of mystical element that it had, especially the ending. Well, I'm actually taking besides my film class, a mythology class. And as you were presenting about, culture and how it's always changing, we kind of learned the same thing with mythology, and kind of that idea that, it's lived. It's not a dead thing. It's not something that stays the same. It's not static. And that's what this film really is about, is this idea that in order to survive, it has to adapt and change.
And
Absolutely.
I think
Very
that
well said.
cultures survive by changing. Yes.
Mhm. And also becoming externalized, right? Something that doesn't just exist in a book that's then put on a shelf, but is something that is very much so a physical thing, right? Sometimes cultures become kind of ossified. They become sort of trapped in these kind of icons tucked away. To Diane, your point also, right? It's a very nature embracing way of being. And so because of that, I mean, some of the stuff has to withstand, the buffets and blows of nature, but also it's designed to sort of interact with it and all the force that nature brings, as opposed to if a culture is, only paper based. And then of course, the book falls apart, it gets burned, and a library's collapse. I'm thinking Alexandria, Alex. I'm not thinking of Penn, but that's it's interesting. Like, how do we decide to articulate our culture? How do we decide to exhibit it? and live it out is, I think, what this film's really thinking about, again, because we see Cliff Curtis going to Europe and commodifying his culture just into these small trinkets and things that Westerners may like, the ones that he's certainly spending time with, bowls and little cups and things in a museum, but that's not really what, to your great point, Gretchen, mythology is about, and culture. It's about much more than that. Okay.
Okay.
David, have you seen this film?
No, but after seeing the review, I probably will watch it.
I'll boot it up for you. I'll get that
can't
going
go
for you.
by it. It's enchanting. It really is enchanting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
get that linked up for me.
Absolutely. And
To
yeah,
be introduced to the Maori culture like that,
Mhm.
it really is. It's instructive and also just enchanting too.
Mm.
So.
Nancy, final thoughts.
I loved it. It was just gorgeous to watch. I loved the music. The relationships were just so deep and real and authentic. I mean, I loved everything about it. I really liked the grandmother.
Yeah.
I think she was a real role model for her granddaughter.
Yeah.
As far as strength, like right from that first, beginning where the grandfather told her to take the baby away, and she's like, here's your granddaughter, like it or not.
Yeah.
And yeah, there were a couple other 2 or 3 times during the movie where she would threaten to divorce him, and I liked it a lot where he left her at school. He didn't pick her up for the summer school, and that grandmother just wouldn't invite anybody in until she had gotten there. Like, she clearly had the upper hand, even though, he wouldn't say so.
He was the leader of the group. You're gonna
Right.
do what I want you to do. Yeah.
And the way they sang that duet, between
Yeah.
she and her granddaughter, that was really
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Excellent. Well, Alex, I think this has been a great discussion. I appreciate you hosting it, as always, to the Pennsylvania Public Library. I know you're working through a new registration system, so likely, will we be getting a reminder email for next month's, or how's that going to work?
Yep, so if you've signed up now, you're signed up for all future sessions through the end of the year, and I will send follow-up messages either the day before or earlier the day of. You can also just keep the link that you used to join today. If you can, bookmark it or scratch it down somewhere, it will work. But I'll send that reminder each month. And if you have any questions about it, get in touch with me. I know that, the Zoom email includes a lot of extra junk that's kind of hard to work through. I can't edit that. That's just kind of baked in. That's the way it is. But if you have any trouble with it or just some clarity is needed, let me know, and we'll try to make it as easy as possible.
Okay, I have a question for Michael or you, Alex. Where can I locate a copy of Mother to see it? How do I do that? I'm
So
pretty,
it's,
not very up on all of this technology. So if you can lend me a hand.
So it's on Tubi, right, Mike? That's what we found.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's something you can watch right on your computer, but I believe you can also add it as a channel if you've got, your smart TV or your Roku set up. If you got your Netflix, your Hulu and all that stuff, you can add
What's the name of it? Tubi?
tubi.com.
Yep. And if you go to Tubi and you just search for Mother, it will come right up.
Okay, and that's free?
Yep. Totally free.
Viewing? Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Mhm.
Yep. Yeah, give it a try. And if you run into any problems, let one of us know and we'll try to figure it out.
Yeah, damn. Yeah, I have to have my son come by and bail me out at times. So, yeah.
That's convenient.
I'll
But yeah,
try to
this is,
figure out how I can hear next time.
yeah, I don't know what's going on there. The glitches just kind of,
It worked last time.
yeah.
Diane,
It's every other turn.
Diane,
Yeah.
were your headphones already plugged in, or did you plug them in?
I plugged them in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
'Cause I've
Yeah.
done that.
yeah.
Mm.
At least
Yeah.
now I know to do this. I'll have them ready.
Absolutely.
All right, well,
yeah.
I guess that does it then. Thank you again, Mike, for your insights, and I'm looking forward to all the next movies where we're gonna keep exploring different cultures and bring those
Yeah.
Right.
wherever
Right.
we are in America.
Right. Wonderful. Thank
Well
you.
said, Alex. Thank you.
Oh, yes.
And thank you for coming, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Night all.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Night.